All right, just imagine ruling an empire
Mm-hmm.
so vast it spanned 3 continents.
Ah,
You command armies.
okay.
That can conquer entire cities.
All right.
And you're overseeing a golden age
Yeah,
of art and culture.
I like it.
That was the reality
Okay.
for Suleiman
Uh-huh.
the Magnificent,
Okay.
the 10th Sultan
Mm-hmm.
of the Ottoman Empire. Today we're diving deep
All right.
into his life and legacy.
Okay.
A story filled with grandeur, intrigue, and some tough lessons that still resonate centuries later.
Mm.
Our guide for this deep dive is a captivating history podcast episode that takes us from the bustling streets of 16th century Istanbul to the heart of the Ottoman court. So get ready to step back in time with us as we explore the world of Suleiman the Magnificent.
You know, when I think about the Ottoman Empire, well, images of opulent palaces and powerful sultans,
Yeah.
they come to mind.
Mm-hmm.
But what really intrigues me
Okay.
is that complex web.
Of power, ambition, and personal relationships that shaped their world. What about you?
Oh, what comes to mind for me is that we often view these historical figures through a lens of, well, romanticized grandeur.
Right.
But the Ottoman Empire, especially in the 16th century, was a complex and dynamic entity. It was this major player on the world stage, a crossroads of trade, and a melting pot of different peoples and different religions. And leading this empire was a young Suleiman facing, well, not just the weight of his lineage,
Right.
but the immense challenges of maintaining stability and expanding Ottoman power.
And the podcast really paints a vivid picture of Suleiman's arrival in Istanbul in 1520. Can you imagine the scene? The Bosporus Strait is cleared for his arrival, his grand galleys approaching the city, the waiting honor guard,
Wow.
and the anticipation of a new era about to begin.
Well, it was a carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to impress but also intimidate.
Yeah.
Suleiman was stepping into this role of sultan with, a legacy to uphold. His ancestors had conquered vast territories, and the eyes of the world were on him to see if he would continue their expansionist policies.
And he didn't waste any time, did he? One of the early events detailed in the podcast is the Siege of Rhodes in 1522, a heavily fortified island held by the Knights Hospitaller. The podcast really brings this event to life. The relentless bombardment, the desperate defense, and finally, the Knights, led by their aging Grand Master, negotiating surrender.
The fall of Rhodes was really significant for several reasons.
Okay.
It demonstrated Suleiman's military capabilities and his strategic approach. He wasn't just about brute force. He understood logistics,
Right.
naval power, and also the importance of choosing his battles wisely.
And what's really striking is his treatment of the defeated knights. He allowed them to leave the island
Really?
with their weapons and possessions.
Wow.
He even provided them with safe passage. It's a surprising act of generosity from, well, a conquering sultan.
Yeah, that act of clemency was quite calculated. It garnered him a reputation for fairness and honor, which helped solidify his authority on that international stage. And also, by avoiding unnecessary bloodshed, he minimized resentment and potential future uprisings. It's a reminder that even in moments of victory, strategic thinking, it extends beyond the battlefield.
Yeah, that's a fascinating example of how a leader's actions can shape their image and influence. But Suleiman wasn't just a conqueror.
Right.
He was also known as the lawgiver, right?
Yes.
The podcast dives into his internal reforms. He overhauled the Ottoman legal system, streamlined administration, basically made the empire function more efficiently.
Yeah, those reforms were crucial to the empire's stability and its longevity. Suleiman inherited this vast and diverse realm with a complex legal system. And by codifying laws, standardizing procedures, and also addressing issues like corruption, he strengthened the foundation of the empire, allowing it to function more effectively and more fairly.
So it wasn't just about conquering new lands,
Right.
but also about strengthening the ones that he already had. And here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Enter Roxolana, a slave girl who captured Suleiman's heart and eventually became his wife, breaking centuries of Ottoman tradition. This must have sent shockwaves through the court. I mean, imagine the whispers, the intrigue, the power dynamics shifting.
It was a highly unconventional move, and it reveals a lot about Suleiman's character. He wasn't afraid to break with tradition, even when it meant defying, centuries of established custom. And it's important to remember that Roxolana wasn't just a pretty face. She was intelligent, ambitious, and she was politically savvy.
The podcast describes a growing tension between Roxolana and Ibrahim Pasha,
Okay.
Suleiman's Grand Vizier
Uh-huh.
and close friend. So you have the ambitious wife
Right.
vying for influence,
Okay.
and the trusted advisor kind of caught in the middle of a changing court.
It was a power struggle waiting to happen. Ibrahim, having served Suleiman for years, was accustomed to a certain level of authority and access, and Roxolana's arrival and her growing influence likely threatened his position,
Yeah.
and potentially his relationship with the Sultan. Remember, power dynamics in a court as intricate as the Ottoman court, they were constantly shifting, and alliances were fluid.
And this tension ultimately culminated in tragedy, right?
Mm.
In 1536, Ibrahim is found dead in his palace quarters, assassinated under mysterious circumstances.
Yeah.
The podcast really emphasizes the shock and secrecy surrounding his death.
Ibrahim's death was a turning point in Suleiman's reign. It consolidated Roxolana's influence, but also sent a chilling message to anyone who dared to challenge her power. And the circumstances surrounding his death, they remain shrouded in mystery, fueling speculation. And it really highlights the dangers of courtly intrigue.
It's like a real-life palace drama, full of whispers, betrayals, and hidden agendas. But let's move on to another key figure in Suleiman's life, Mustafa, his eldest son and a seemingly ideal heir to the throne. He was experienced, he was popular, and well-prepared for leadership.
Okay.
Why wasn't he the clear choice for succession?
Well, Mustafa possessed, many qualities of a capable ruler. Ottoman succession wasn't a simple matter of, primogeniture. It was a complex system influenced by political maneuvering, alliances, and unfortunately, sometimes even violence.
And this is where things take a dark turn.
Okay.
The podcast details the tragic events of 1553, false accusations against Mustafa,
Wow.
fueled by Roxolana's manipulations,
Uh-huh.
ultimately leading to Suleiman making the unthinkable decision
Mm-hmm.
to execute his own son. It's a heart-wrenching story of ambition,
Yeah.
betrayal, and the brutal realities of power.
The execution of Mustafa is one of the most controversial events of Suleiman's reign. It raises questions about the influence of Roxolana,
Right.
the extent of Suleiman's paranoia, and the lengths to which individuals would go to secure power for themselves, but also for their children.
And this event seems to mark a turning point in Suleiman's reign. The podcast describes a shift in his demeanor after Mustafa's death.
Okay.
He becomes more withdrawn, more disillusioned, perhaps even haunted by the weight of his decision.
The death of Mustafa cast this long shadow over the remainder of Suleiman's rule. It highlighted the human cost of power, the potential for even the most astute rulers to make devastating errors in judgment, and the complex interplay of personal emotions and political machinations in shaping the course of history.
It's a reminder that power, even on a grand scale, doesn't shield you from the consequences of your choices. Now, before we move on, I want to pause here and ask you, our listener, what are your initial impressions of Suleiman so far? Is he living up to his title of the Magnificent?
It's a question worth pondering as we delve further into his story. It's interesting to consider how Suleiman's personal life, might have impacted his decisions as a ruler.
Yeah,
We've talked about Roxolana's influence and the tragic execution of Mustafa.
of course.
But the podcast also mentions the death of his beloved Roxolana just a few years after Mustafa. It makes you wonder about the emotional toll these events took on him.
Yeah, the podcast does describe him as a changed man
Okay.
after those losses.
Yeah.
He seems to retreat further into himself, becoming more devout in his religious practices, and perhaps seeking solace in the spiritual realm.
It's almost as if those later military setbacks,
Yeah.
like the failed siege of Malta, were a reflection of a ruler
Right.
grappling with grief
Right.
and disillusionment.
It's a fascinating thought. Perhaps the Suleiman of the later years, the one who had experienced such profound loss, was a different ruler than the ambitious conqueror of his youth.
Yeah.
It really humanizes him, doesn't it? It reminds us that even the most powerful figures are still vulnerable to the same heartache and grief that we all experience.
Absolutely. It challenges the image of the stoic, all-powerful sultan and reveals a man wrestling with the complexities of life, loss, and the burden of leadership.
This brings us to Suleiman's later years, a period marked by both personal loss and military setbacks. The podcast highlights the failed siege of Malta in 1566,
Right.
a campaign that drained Ottoman resources and ultimately ended in defeat. It's a stark contrast to his earlier triumphs.
Yeah, the Siege of Malta is often seen as a turning point in Ottoman military history, marking the beginning of this gradual decline in their dominance. It's interesting to consider how factors beyond military strategy might have contributed to this outcome.
Right.
Could Suleiman's personal losses and the shifting political landscape within the empire have played a role?
What's particularly intriguing is that the podcast describes efforts to conceal Suleiman's death during this campaign. They
Right.
went to great lengths to make it seem as though he was still alive and in command, even using a body double.
Wow.
Why all the secrecy?
Well, the Ottoman Empire, like many empires throughout history, relied heavily on the image of a strong and decisive leader. News of the Sultan's death, especially during a military campaign, could have sparked instability, challenges to the succession, or even, outright rebellion.
It's a reminder that the perception of power can be just as important as the actual exercise of power.
Right.
By maintaining the illusion of Suleiman's continued leadership, they were essentially buying time to ensure a smooth transition of power to his successor, Selim II.
Exactly. They understood that a power vacuum, even a perceived one, could have had disastrous consequences for the empire.
It's like a carefully orchestrated political theater designed to project an image of stability
Yeah.
and continuity, even as the reality was quite different.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you wonder, what would have happened if the news of Suleiman's death had leaked out prematurely?
It's a question historians continue to debate.
Yeah.
Could it have led to challenges to Selim's claim to the throne?
Right.
Might it have emboldened rivals within the empire or encouraged external enemies to take advantage of the situation?
Yeah.
We can only speculate, but it highlights the fragility of power.
And the importance of managing perceptions, especially during times of transition.
It really makes you appreciate the complexities of leadership, doesn't it? It's not just about military prowess
Right.
or political maneuvering. It's also about understanding the psychology of power, the importance of symbolism, and the delicate art of managing expectations.
And those are lessons that resonate far beyond the world of the Ottoman Empire. They're relevant to leaders in all walks of life, whether in business, politics, or even within our own families and communities.
It's a reminder that leadership at its core is about human nature. It's about understanding how people think, how they respond to authority, and how to inspire them to follow.
And that understanding, as we see in Suleiman's story, can be both a source of great strength, but also a potential vulnerability.
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to turn it back to you, our listener. What are your thoughts on Suleiman's later years? Do these events change your perception of him as a ruler? It's a question worth considering as we move toward the final chapter of his life and legacy.
So we've explored Suleiman's conquests, his reforms, his triumphs, and his tragedies. But as we approach the end of his story,
Okay.
I'm curious about his lasting legacy. How did his reign shape the Ottoman Empire? And what impact did he have on, well, the course of history?
Suleiman's reign is often considered the golden age of the Ottoman Empire. It was a period of unprecedented expansion, cultural flourishing, and legal and administrative reforms that really strengthened the empire's foundation. And his impact on architecture, the arts, and literature, it's still evident in Turkey today and throughout the former Ottoman territories.
The podcast mentions some of his grand architectural projects, like the Suleimani Mosque
Okay.
in Istanbul, a magnificent structure that rivals the Hagia Sophia in its grandeur. It's amazing to think that these buildings, they still stand today as, well, testaments to the artistic and architectural achievements of his era.
Those structures are more than just beautiful buildings. They're symbols of Suleiman's ambition and his vision. He wanted to create a lasting legacy, to leave his mark on the world, and he certainly achieved that.
It's interesting to contrast his approach to legacy
Okay.
with that of, well, other powerful rulers throughout history. Some were obsessed with conquering vast territories, others with amassing wealth. But Suleiman seems to have invested in, well, a more multifaceted approach,
Right.
combining military might with, cultural and legal advancements.
He understood that true power wasn't just about military strength,
Right.
but also about creating a stable and prosperous society that would endure, long after he was gone. His legal reforms, in particular, aimed to establish a more just and equitable system that would benefit all subjects of the empire.
It's a reminder that true leadership is about more than just personal ambition.
Right.
It's about serving the greater good and leaving a positive impact on the world.
And that's a lesson that transcends time and place. It's something that leaders in all fields, whether in government, business, or even within our own communities, can learn from.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the grandeur of Suleiman's arrival in Istanbul to the complexities of his personal life and the challenges of his later years.
Ah,
As we wrap up,
okay.
I'm curious to hear your final thoughts on Suleiman the Magnificent. Was he truly magnificent?
It's a question that historians, they continue to debate. There's no doubt that he was this brilliant military strategist, a skilled administrator, and a patron of the arts. But he was also a man of his time. Shaped by the cultural norms and political realities of the 16th century, his decided to execute his son, Mustafa. It remains a controversial topic, and his later years were marked by personal loss and military setbacks.
Perhaps magnificent is too simplistic a label.
Yeah.
For such a complex figure, he was a man of great achievements, but also, of flaws and vulnerabilities, just like all of us.
And that's what makes history so fascinating. It's not just about dates and battles, but about the human stories behind those events. It's about exploring the complexities of leadership, the motivations of individuals, and the interplay of personal and political forces that shape the course of events.
And ultimately, it's about learning from the past, both its triumphs and its tragedies, so that we can make more informed choices in the present.
So the next time you encounter a historical figure, whether it's a powerful sultan or an ordinary citizen, remember that there's always more to the story than, meets the eye.
Yeah.
Dig deeper, ask questions, and be open to the complexities and contradictions that make history so endlessly fascinating.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And that's what we strive to do here on The Deep Dive. To spark your curiosity, encourage you to explore different perspectives, and to appreciate the richness and, the complexity of the past.
We hope this deep dive into the world of Suleiman the Magnificent has left you with a renewed appreciation for the power of history.
Yeah.
To illuminate the human condition.
And to inspire us to learn and grow.
And if you enjoyed this journey into the Ottoman Empire, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more fascinating explorations of the past. We'll be back soon with another episode that's sure to spark your imagination and leave you pondering the mysteries of history.
Until then, happy learning.
And keep on diving.